Hello, everybody, and welcome to another of our business conversations in the series that we're holding with friends of our business group. My name is Danny Thorniley, President of the Russia CE Business Group, and a warm welcome to all our listeners. And we know these discussions are very popular, and I'm sure you will enjoy this one. I'm speaking today with a friend of the family, Philip Gudgeon, who is the CEO of Schneider Group. Warm welcome, Philip. An Englishman working in Russia. How did that happen? And tell us, I know quite a lot about Schneider Group, but please tell us about the company as well.
Very briefly on myself, would you believe it? I first came to Russia, being the Soviet Union, during Leonid Brezhnev's time as a university student. I was a student of modern languages at Cambridge, one of those being Russian. Of course, in those days, we had no inkling that it was ever going to be a live possibility to come and live and work in the country. That certainly wasn't my expectation at the time. But I started coming here then more frequently in the 80s, and I came out here to work in 1995 with Pricewaterhouse at the time. And in fact, of my 30 or so years in this part of the world, the vast majority of them have been spent in the consulting, the management consulting sector. I joined Schneider Group from the consulting firm Oliver Wyman 1 year ago, just over 1 year ago. Schneider Group was founded by a German businessman, entrepreneur called Ulf Schneider, who is the president of the company. It covers a range of outsourcing and consultancy services for mainly, although not exclusively, for international companies operating in the Russia and CIS markets, Russia, CIS and CE, since we have offices not only in Russia, being Moscow and St. Petersburg, but also in Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Armenia. I think I've not forgotten anyone there. And the idea of the company is to ease the entry and improve the business prospects of our clients, in these territories. In more recent times, we've really turned our face also towards Russian clients. Perhaps that is also a result of the fact that these are not the best times for international business in Russia because of sanctions and other factors. But still, we have a good installed base of clients here, and we seek to develop that. We're offering accountancy, internal controls and audit, legal and tax advisory, IT, especially ERP consulting, business process improvement, and another of our interim management, and another of this would be the main services that we're offering.
My first question to you would be, after the personal one, 2020 was the COVID year, and maybe 2021 and some others, let's see. But just generally, Schneider Group looking at the world and the big mega trends of clients before we move into Russia, what were the obvious cons, and were there some positives in the global dynamics that you and your colleagues were seeing?
I think, we would have to recognize that our clients, who cover a broad range of industry sectors, some of them are B2C sectors, some B2B clients. Obviously, there is a heavy representation of European firms in engineering, construction, pharma, but also in retail and in other consumer-oriented industries. They were all in very different places when I think the COVID-19 events, took hold, and I think it caught a number of them very unawares. I think some of them were in the midst of, for example, a very large expansion of their physical networks in Russia, and we saw those programs getting completely rolled back, over very rapid time frames. Others were already very well set up for e-commerce, and were able to make fast progress on that. So I think one of the things that how this impacted us very much is we're a service provider. I think our raison d'etre is to provide uninterrupted client service at any cost. So our main task was to make sure that the business of our clients in this situation was not impacted. I think one of the ways we were able to do that was by being quite flexible about the terms of service. We were able to scale up or scale down the level of our service, adapt the different things we were doing for them. And so I think the big trend was simply getting over the crisis first of all, right? And then I think we're now seeing longer run effects as well from all of this. And of course, one of them has been the way in which companies look at their own internal operating models, and how that impacts the way what they do in-house and what they buy externally. So in a strange and perhaps not anticipated way, we've seen some companies actually look to outsource, to buy the kind of services we offer in an outsourced way, because they've seen that in view of the crisis, they've had to increase flexibility in their operating model. So I think we've seen a number of companies come and say, look, we want to, we don't want to have this particular function, be it accounting or HR. We don't want this in-house. Can you take it over? Can you do that? And of course, some of that was grist to our mill. Some of it was a challenge because there was a scale factor involved. So that's one side of the story. The other side of the story, of course, is that with the very strong march towards digitization of all kinds of internal processes, a lot of the services we offer, although they have a digital foundation, they also have a very, very strong expertise component. And we've seen strong pressure, to the commoditization of those services, companies looking for greater and greater flexibility, looking for more and more efficiency out of those very processes. It's been a very, very strong impulse for us towards, automating our own processes and improving our digital platforms. And I think that especially impacts things like accounting, because there's a large routine element in those operations. So that's, I think, sort of a slightly asymmetric set of effects that we've seen from the crisis. Overall, I would say that with very few exceptions, we've seen our customers weathering, the crisis. So we've seen very few cases of people withdrawing from the market. Although I think, to be fair, we've seen people scaling back their plans with respect to the market, and in a few cases we've seen liquidations of particular entities that we've also assisted with.
Speaking with many executives, as I've been doing week in, week out, I saw a shift around about November, December in the Russian market of more and more companies saying, well, we survived 2020 and the outlook for 2021 is feeling not too bad or even better. Now, again, maybe, would you confirm that? And I'm also speaking with executives on the Middle East, which is not so strong in my opinion. And we saw this in 2015. So you talked about the mood, and I would say, could you elaborate that? Less lockdown in Russia, therefore more HoReCa and retail going on. People going to the restaurants. We were talking before privately about, access to the service industry in the UK or Vienna. Vienna was closed for 6 months effectively. So the business mood amongst your international and Russian clients, what's it like? And could you go into a bit more depth on the sectors?
I think the fundamentals of Russia as an economy and as a market remain quite strong in the eyes of most of our clients, and I think that explains their reluctance to pull out entirely. And I think you're right. In many ways the lockdown was shorter and sharper here and less protracted than in many other places, which meant that people were able to get back to a semblance of normality much quicker. And that has been the atmosphere, I think. And in fact, we've seen some of our clients, really booming, right? And I think in that particular respect, particularly perhaps some of the businesses that are connected with, let's say, construction, machinery. I'm just thinking now which ones have really. I think some of the pharma clients that we have done extremely well as well. Yes. The healthcare sector in general. I think all kinds of specialized machinery and this kind of thing. There's a sort of sense that the sort of industrial landscape is relatively healthy. I think they're just, for example, one of our clients is a major manufacturer of pipes. From Germany. They said we've absolutely boomed. We've kind of blasted through our sales plan completely unexpectedly for the year already in May, you know, and again, it's this underlying that there's a sort of, you know, obviously a construction boom. There's all kinds of infrastructure investments happening as part of the Russia's national programs. So I think on the retail side, it's a more mixed picture, because clearly those firms that were, you know, had perhaps a more omni-channel approach already in retail. They had a strong web presence, perhaps had strong, you know, fulfillment and logistics capabilities to be able to do e-commerce. You know, obviously much better set up than those that had put all their baskets in, you know, in physical presence. Having said that, you know, you go around the malls here and you see them absolutely full of people, and retail appears to be booming, right? And I think that is also confirmed by all of our clients. We've seen some of our clients return to the program of opening physical outlets despite what's happened.
Yeah.
I think right now, as we speak, there's a very different atmosphere emerging. I don't know whether you've been following, but in the last few days, there is really quite a sort of upsurge in sickness.
By the way, Philip, on what you said about construction, residential construction is, you know, rising big double digits, and house prices in Moscow are strong double digits as well. So we're seeing that. I was speaking with a friend of ours in the construction sector. She's the managing director of a construction company, and she was saying, I want the boom that we're experiencing now, I want the boom to stop. And she was referring there to and that's my question to you if you're seeing it, input producer price inflation, because so many people are talking about, you know, the cost of metal, timber, packaging, food, soya, wheat, etc. So, you know, business is booming, but we don't know what price to charge. The client wants this price, who takes the risk, and so forth. It's not something I planned to ask you about, but, you know, you talked about the boom. Is that, I'm hearing it. I just wonder, are you and your colleagues hearing a lot about that?
Yeah, well, I'm no expert in the commodity behavior of these commodity markets or input markets, but yes, I have heard that there is, you know, significant you know, sort of uncertainty around input costs in some businesses, and it's very hard to know, you know, is that a sort of spike? I suspect not. I suspect we're just on going to ride the upsurge in those things, right? And it makes life extremely hard for those types of business, I think. Yeah, I think generally, I mean, you know, I think the economics of a lot of companies have been thrown up in the air by what's happened. You know, just the ability to predict even, you know, top line demand, the ability to understand, you know, I think we'll come on to HR later, but I think the sort of labor inputs as well are a kind of like a question mark at the moment. I mean, mainly because we just see that there are sort of severe supply constraints already emerging in the labor force, right? And that's in Moscow in particular. We can come on to this a bit, but I think it's almost a paradoxical result of what we've been expecting over the last year.
Yeah, no, these are the costs and the price of the rise in business and development. I just wonder, you know, from several of the themes, what you were saying and what your business services are, localization. Now, I know you could flip it and say, well, who wants to localize and invest more in Russia? FDI is down, we know that. But I'm thinking more like you're implying there, you've got some companies invested already in Russia, they're doing good business, and global headquarters say, we won't invest 100 million there, but you've made your profits, reinvest them as you choose, build a logistics center or God knows what. Are you seeing the trend in localization up, down, neutral for your services and what you're doing?
I would say if you're talking about sort of new to the market, I agree. Less so. Clearly down from what it has been. I mean, I think there are just fewer foreign companies that are willing to kind of, you know, enter deeply into the Russian market at this particular time, given everything that's happening. In terms of those who've already committed to the market, I think there is, you know, often there's this effect of, we understand what it is to do business in Russia. We know that it's possible to get things done. We're comfortable enough with the basics here of, you know, selling we understand what we require to localize production, and they're willing to take that plunge. So there is some more of that, and I think there are plenty of good, solid cases for those firms to fall back on and to look at, right? And so yes, I think there is that sort of silver lining to the story around localization at the moment, and we still see some business in that area. We work very closely with a lot of the industrial parks in Russia, some of whom sometimes engage us to work on their behalf to attract inward investment. Sometimes we're simply dealing with them because we have a client that is on the lookout for a way to localize. So that it works in both directions, but it remains a sort of an important component of our business. And I think one of the original ideas behind our business was to provide that full cycle, if you like, of taking people from being interested in Russia as a market in the West, helping them to understand the strategic opportunities through elements of market research, strategic analysis, right the way through to actually planning and executing a localization strategy, and everything in between, with forms of interim management, legal and tax work, all the compliance that surround, setting up legal entities and accounting for them, the rest of it in Russia. So that's very much the original, I suppose, inspiration with which Schneider Group was established.
I'd like to take a little bit further, because I know one area of expertise, and one of the themes that your founder Ulf Schneider is very interested in is the Eurasian Economic Union, Lisbon to Vladivostok, but certainly within that is the Eurasian Economic Union. And, I think most of our listeners know it well. If I could unfairly generalize, I would say that, there's been a lot of initial interest years ago, and those who understand it and who benefit from it use it, and maybe successfully. But I still think there's a number of companies in different sectors who are ambivalent about the opportunities, or I don't think threats. Certainly in the pharmaceutical sector and health, we've seen a number of companies investigate it and use it. How do you and your colleagues view it?
I mean, I think it's, in my opinion, it exists on two levels. So, there's the big picture level of, if you like, alignment of the European Union and other international bodies with the European Economic Union, Eurasian Economic Union. And I think that sort of big, sort of macro quasi-political level is one side of it. It's on that level, it's an idea whose time will come, right? Everyone is kind of broadly in favor, but there's too much national politics, geopolitics that get in the way of it a lot of the time, right? I think on another lower and more pragmatic level, it has all kinds of sort of, individual industry specifics. I mean, you mentioned sort of pharma, there's all kinds of harmonization of standards and, tariffs and what have you. And I think on this level, a lot of progress can be made for that. I'm no expert in the details of that, but I believe it's something for which a strong mutual interest exists, and I think that means that it will progress even under the radar screen. There'll be lots more work done to harmonize tariff standards and everything that enables or potentially hinders trade, between countries. So I do see that developing.
From there, a little bit of field. I just picked this because I know, and you mentioned at the start, the markets you're involved in, and please, develop any of the other ones. But Belarus is in the news for a variety of reasons. I've been talking with a number of the companies I work with, and generally, I think the mood music has been, well, actually, until recently or whatever, we've been doing quite okay. Within our surveys, the numbers don't reflect that too much. Belarus is, compared with Russia or Ukraine or Kazakhstan, it's the weaker of those four. But, you and your colleagues, I think, are quite clued into Belarus. And from the business and general outlook, how do you see it?
Yeah, so our own business there has not only stood up rather well during these political crises, but actually grown.
Hmm.
And I think one of the reasons for that is that we have developed a strong focus on the IT sector there, and there was a point in time in which we were quite worried about that, even because it looked as though there was a sort of en masse exodus from Belarus to Ukraine or
Hmm.
other places. But in fact, that seems to have stabilized, and we see um, quite a sort of lively picture there. I mean, there's a very downbeat message that comes from our people there. I mean, our
Hmm.
people there are obviously very, very anxious and concerned about the political and societal situation. I mean, they say, they say it's actually quite frightening at
Hmm.
times, and and I think that environment, there's no getting away from the fact that that is not an environment which is going to be conducive to inward investment and but I think Belarus has, it has got these things to offer. It has got its strong points. It's held up very well despite all of this. And again, we have no intention of scaling back what we're doing there. It also served us as a little bit as a little bit of a bridge to Poland as well. For a while, we were sort of, we were helping to oversee our Warsaw office out of
Hmm.
Belarus, believe it or not.
Oh.
Although that's the only kind of European Union office that we have, apart from say Germany and Austria, where we also have small offices. In Poland,
Hmm.
we're also we've always had this office, which is a slight outlier for us for a number of reasons, including linguistic reasons, because a lot of our internal um, dialogue as a company is conducted in Russian, being a sort of the former Soviet Union space. Poland is obviously different to that, and we have to manage, we have to treat it differently. So, but Belarus has got its, Belarus has got, is a bit of a bridge, east-west bridge, and I feel culturally it will play that role, and I think it'll be fine.
Hmm.
The societal situation is worrying though, because
Yeah.
one wonders how long these situations that we have now, how long that sort of degree of tension
Sustainable.
can be sustained. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. No, I think we should, on operational on the ground business, I think we share the view that it's uh, remarkably resilient for many, but not for all, for sure. I think the other big thing that's come out, you've mentioned it once or twice, is digitalization. You talked about e-commerce, but I think it merits further here. Um, by the way, you and your colleagues know the numbers as well as I do. Both for Central Europe and Russia, e-commerce as a percentage of retail was nationally 3 to 4% pre-COVID, shot up to 10, 11, and then came down to 7, 8 would be an average for many markets. But that's e-commerce, and please make any further remarks on that. But you got the whole digitalization going on within companies, and one thing, which will later in the conversation take us to, work from home and,
Yeah.
digital from home. But really, some further comments, please, Philip, on e-commerce and corporate digitalization. What are you and your colleagues seeing?
Well, I think it's progressing extremely fast, and I think we ourselves, we were already on this trend, but we've had to accelerate it. And in particular for us, what does that mean? It means that a lot of our clients are looking to interact with us in a paperless way, and in a remote way. So, for example, if we're talking about back office services in Russia, which is the area we're effectively working in, you could take, for example, a company that had anything from 10 to several thousand employees working. There's a huge amount of HR administration associated with having those employees. Between 40, 60, we talk about the potentially even more regular forms which have a legal, which are legally binding, things from vacation allowances to payroll related documentation that has to be conducted by our clients. So in outsourcing those services to us, they expect that to be done digitally, right? So we've developed a digital platform which we call Client Login. Effectively, it's a portal for HR administration services. So that means that the employees of that company can conduct those HR processes remotely and electronically, with the then full electronic processing of those forms through the accounting system, and further on. And I think that's an example, if you like, of us both making our own services to our clients electronic, but it's also actually, in fact, making electronic and making digital the internal processes of our clients. And I think that which I think is what you were referring to, is that, you know, an awful lot of digitalization has to occur inside, you know, inside the company. It's everything from the sort of banal digitization of the immediate workplace, you know, that people can book meeting rooms, you know, digitally. They can deal with their suppliers, they can deal with their clients digitally, and the more banal stuff, meetings and what have you, as you mentioned, right, in this world. And I think that trend is undoubtedly there. And I don't see Russia as particularly laggardly in all of that, right? So
yeah.
I think there's a high degree of openness and appetite to it. If I had to generalize very, very broadly, I would say the large corporates here were well onto this trend a long time ago and were well advanced. I think what we've seen over the last year has been the mid-sized firms playing catch up on that, sometimes with a good high degree of difficulty. But I think I think that's been the real difference over the last year, is those mid-sized firms realizing they needed to have digitization strategies. I think with some companies, it goes a great deal further. I mean, one topic which I'm hearing a lot about and participating in to some extent myself is innovation strategies in the market. So an awful lot of companies now are saying, it isn't enough for us to kind of digitize our existing processes. We need to have a pipeline of innovations to change the way we do business and to create new revenue streams. So more and more I see that's giving rise to all kinds of, everything from very much in-house sort of incubators for various sort of startup business operations and ideas, to accelerators that are multi-company operating in the market. So a lot of the large corporations here are very much moving into that. I think our own client base being predominantly foreign companies working in Russia, they're obviously very much often on the receiving end of what the parent company is doing in this area, right? And they're trying to apply that then to the Russian market. But the specifics of this market being what they are in terms of the legislation, very often, it's not so easy to apply those things. They need local solutions, and I think that's potentially where we can play as well.
Thank you. We're talking today on checking the 16th of June, and Presidents Biden and Putin are meeting today in Geneva. I'll give you my 30-second political and sanctions outlook, and then I'd like your feedback, Philip. Domestic and international politics for Russia are not good if we take a long-term view. Equally, they're not good in China, and businesses generally flourishing there. They're certainly not good in the United States of America, and we're seeing a stock market boom, a technology boom, and so forth, and fiscal expansion from President Biden. Russia's politics, they say, could be described as not good, but business, as we both seem to have agreed, is not bad or definitely good. So the political impact on operational business is one issue. Obviously, for Russia, politics has impacted the ruble for the last couple of years, and that's been a significant thing. Just in closing from me, my view is that, sanctions, the threat might be exaggerated, presuming no fundamental changes from where we are today. I think the Europeans, and I'd like your input because I know your company is very close to the German business community. I think the Europeans are very loath to introduce new sanctions on Russia. We know about Nord Stream 2, of course. But my point then would be, would you agree that, the likely threat of sanctions on business and the ruble is limited, or do you have a different view? And then the second question I would have is, many of the companies and executives I work with have very long experience of Russia, and they take the view Danny, yes, business operationally is good, but we don't see a collapse in the short, medium term, far from it. But the relationships, despite what might happen today for the photographs, the depths of the relationship are maybe, fundamentally divided, and the detachment seems unbridgeable at the moment. What would your thoughts be on those themes, Philip?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in terms of whether there may be further sanctions or not, I would say that's entirely possible, perhaps even probable. I think the impact on the ruble, however, in my reading of things, it would be somewhat limited. I think such damage as could have been, as was capable of being done to the Russian economy, was done several years ago, and since that time, Russia has been insulating its economy to a very large extent, right? I mean, I used to be very involved in my previous role just in the banking sector and financial service, and I think a prime example there would be payment systems. They created from scratch a credit card processing operation in Russia. They forced Visa and MasterCard to process all their transactions in the country through that. They launched their own card. They, since that time, have been, launching sort of marketplaces and other kind of financial services capabilities, which would, whether that would enable them to survive, entirely feel comfortable being cut off from SWIFT, I don't know. But I think in reality, Russia would weather even that. And in many ways, the economy, obeys to a very large extent its own internal kind of logic now, and it seems to me, right? Is there scope for greater optimism? That's a harder one to read. I mean, I see a very paradoxical situation in the world at the moment. In some ways, never has there been clearer evidence of kind of global alignment than has been evident through the COVID-19 crisis. That you've seen everyone basically doing the same stuff, try to figure things out the same way, and in many ways, being part of the same picture. On the other hand, there is still this very sort of really quite, it seems to be quite divisive landscape in the world, right? And and perhaps Russia is maybe not at the epicenter of it so much as Iran these days, right? But there's plenty of scope, it seems, in the world for some shock, say involving Iran or involving China, to draw Russia into a conflict situation. So I think there are these kind of threats very much out there in the world.
In summary, the experience of the general manager I'm speaking with is that the Russian staff performed exceedingly well through the crisis period. Good experience, good anecdotes, and so forth. As you were implying, finding talent, because the business environment is not bad. So there is a demand for talent, there's a demand for digital talent, that's for sure. And then, of course, we have the work from home experience, which is probably going to be one of the fundamental changes in the future. My guess, and I'm interested in your views, is close to the consensus, over the next 1, 2, 3 years, 25% fewer people in offices on average, although we both know that Russian companies like to have the staff in the office much more than Westerners. So on all those themes, Philip, and people in Russia, what are the key points you would like to communicate?
Well, we're one of those companies that does prefer to have the staff in the office, but it's undeniable. I think that the experience of the past year has created created a sea shift, I think, in people's understanding of the relationship between their life and their work. I think it's actually far deeper than a lot of people imagine. I think for a lot of people, it's been almost amounted to an existential, crisis of a reevaluation of their entire lifestyle, to the point where some staff, I think, are reluctant to come back to the office, not necessarily out of any epidemiological or health related concerns, but simply because they no longer feel that motivated by the additional social benefits that derive from being in the office. I think that's problematic to some extent, because whatever we may say about learning curve that we've traveled up in terms of using video conferencing and other remote working tools, there is a loss through people not interacting in the office. And I think the loss is often in an area of creativity and innovation, and the ability to kind of to think outside the box, to use a cliche, right? And so I think that's one aspect of all of this, that we're at risk of kind of really, we're at risk of underestimating the losses involved in this. I think the other thing is I really do see that there has been a significant tightening of the labor market. I mean, we see even in our core business, we're finding that getting people with the right level of qualifications, in the right numbers, for the price that we believe is a correct market price, is harder and harder. We're having to fish outside the Moscow pool into the Russian regions, which brings issues of its own to fight. And that's not just in accounting, it's in IT, it's in various other areas as well. So it's a tightening of this market. How exactly to explain that? I think it speaks about some of the larger players growing. I think they're just sucking in, hoovering in a lot of the available resource that we believed was out there before. I think some of it is this people reevaluating in what type of environment they're prepared to work post-COVID. Well, I think we're going to have to. We're all going to have to adapt to that. I think one of perhaps the effects of the crisis, this kind of democratization of the labor pool, right? You now have access to potentially many different types of elements of the labor force, from part-time workers, to people who are on maternity leave, to students, and we're going to all have to become a lot more creative about tapping into different pools of that labor, which they all, in a sense, now have greater opportunity from the employee point of view, but from the employer point of view, there's quite a sort of significant shift involved, because our career models and our training and everything is not geared up to utilize those different labor pools.
Absolutely. And I think one of the cliches you've surely heard with me is, 3 days in, 2 days out, or some variations on that. And that's easy to say in a summary sentence, as I just did. But then to actually implement that with roles and rotation and people linking in for, synergy meetings and so on, will be, a challenge for HR. And then the other one you're talking about there, with Russia being more touchy-feely in the office, physical, maybe it's less of a challenge, but it's still there, and it's certainly there in other markets, might be Ukraine or Poland and Western Europe, where, getting to know your staff, many managing directors have not met their new people for, 15 months or whatever, that kind of thing. And one HR director was just saying, how do we you touched upon it, how do we motivate people, how to retain them now in this new environment? As I say, though, if we go more away from digital, as COVID diminishes, hopefully, then that might be less of a challenge, but we will see. Good.
Yeah.
By the way, please.
No, I think it may be. I don't think we will go significantly away from digital as COVID recedes. I have a feeling that this will be a more long run than we perhaps might think. And you're right. I think Russia, there's a very strong sort of paternalistic tradition to employment, isn't there? The employees here would regard the employer as a really as a sort of second home. I heard many stories that even in the worst crises here, employees would almost prefer not to be paid, but still to have a place to come to work. So a lot of employers will pay the absolute minimum, but retain the staff, but the staff will be prepared to work for very little, provided they have a roof over their head to be employed. And I think that's different to other countries where there'd be a much more sort of utilitarian perhaps view of the employee relationship.
Just I have a question that's just come to my mind as we were speaking. I do know you're the philosophy of the where to work and how to work for Schneider Group. But given that you folks need brain power and everything you've just said, for example, if you can get a good accountant working for you in Omsk at an attractive fee, visiting your offices in Moscow once a year, once every 3 months or whatever, you tell me, is that a model you would consider or advocate to your clients?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's not one which without its challenges. And I would say that, for we as a company would have quite specific rules for how we operate, for how we have quite a lot of very specific procedures for how we sort of do our client accounting and the rest of it. And of course, it becomes much more challenging to do that with a fully dispersed workforce, so who haven't been through the mill of being trained up in the firm. But increasingly, that's exactly the sort of solution we're having to adopt, and it's one which the clients themselves have become increasingly used to over the period of the lockdowns and the COVID-19 crisis to date, because they got used to having their own accountants dispersed and working with them, and that in turn led them to think, well, why don't we let somebody else manage them, right? Why don't we get Schneider Group to actually take these people on, or indeed to run this for us, right? So I think it's been one of those effects that, as I referred to at the beginning, it's kind of loosened up people's understanding of what operating model they need to have in-house versus outsourced, and that's actually played in our favor, actually, of our business as a phenomenon.
And just to, as I say, just to bring us to a conclusion, it's always nice to say nice things about Russia and the Russians. I'm presuming quite strongly, and I'll feel an idiot if you contradict me now, but the experience with your staff over the last year or so, your Schneider Group people, has been a positive one, I imagine.
Yeah, it very much has. I mean, I think I think one of the things you get here in this country is a strong sort of sense of solidarity and collective spirit, and certainly that was the case with us. I mean, people really pulled together, especially at the beginning of the lockdown, which actually coincided with my first days in the company. But there was this, literally my first days in the company were the first days of enforced lockdown, and that was a period of intense activity, just getting everybody set up to work from home, and that's everything from equipment to the servers, everything, making sure that it would all be uninterrupted, and people really pulled together on that. And of course, over time you develop new ways to network people and to make sure they're okay, and to make sure kind of the teamwork is occurring. And I think all that has been actually a very positive experience for us.
Many of the companies I'm talking with say digital has been fine for maintaining existing relationships with people we know. It's not been ideal, but it's fine. But doing new business with existing clients is a bit more of a challenge digitally. But the real stumbling block is developing new businesses with new people digitally. Have you and your clients come across that much?
Well, actually, on some level, it may be true, and particularly in Russia, as you know, I mean, there was always a sort of strong, need to build a relationship before you get into a commercial relationship. But actually, I think there's a paradoxically, again, there's a sort of counter effect, and that is that I think one of the effects of our video interaction, our remote interaction, is it kind of lowers the bar for getting meetings in the first place. So my sort of feeling before was that you typically, to sort of get anywhere in in a commercial establishment, you would need to get a physical meeting, and you had to earn the right to get that meeting. You had to basically get introduced, make a value proposition, and people were filtering out huge amounts of this. Now, of course, we've all got Zoom overload, we've all got digital webinar overload. That's true. But if someone were to approach you and say, look, here's something we've got which we really think you're interested in, and we'd like to get to know you and build a relationship, the bar to accepting that online is much lower than it was a physical world. So the experience has actually been that it's actually relatively easy to get the Zoom meetings. Now then, that's through the door, right? Whatever happens after that is of course another story, right? But I've seen quite a few kind of major sort of pitch type interactions with clients happening online, And I don't see any sort of necessary sort of reason why they're less effective. And in some ways, I think people have got very used to that. So I'm not sure. And business development, I think it is changing a bit. And I think talking to some of our colleagues in Kazakhstan the other day, and I said, well, how are you developing business now? And they said, well, look, we keeping our eyes open. We walk around town. We see who's advertising on the big billboards. We see, who's building what. We see kind of new signposts going up with new companies and we will simply approach those companies. We'll say, we are Schneider Group. We'd like to build a business relationship with you, find out more about your business. And, and that's where that getting through the door, the low bar of getting a Zoom meeting, if not a physical meeting, often actually works. And so they've been incredibly successful in this period of actually building new relationships. And I think it's true in Moscow too. It's true that probably just walking around town, you need to spend quite a lot of time doing it to really identify the new kids on the block. But and in our sector, it's less obvious because they're in and amongst a lot of Russian business. But I think nevertheless, the same holds true.
Well, that's I don't disagree with that analysis, Philip, at all, far from it. But it's been a minority view so far. So good to know, and yeah,
nice to be in the minority.
Well, the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks, yes, indeed. Great, Philip. Thank you so much indeed for that. It was a real pleasure.
Take care, then, Danny. Yeah,
look forward to seeing you soonish.
Thanks, and catch up soon. All the best. Bye bye.